Hey guys, in this video I want to show you how to make this liquid growth animation using Houdini. Let's dive in. So I have already imported a geometry from Quixel Bridge, which is just a simple rock like this one. And by default, when you are importing geometry from Quixel Bridge to Houdini, it will automatically create a material network here with the textures already assigned to our geometry. And the geometry is just like this. So now I will copy the null from here, so Ctrl C, and I will go back into the object level. And here I will create a new geometry node. So let's add geometry. And we can rename it something like render test, for example. So I have my final setup just here, but I will remake everything from scratch. So let's dive into the geometry node here. Let's add an object merge just to import our rocks into this object. So let's Ctrl V into the object one here. And now we have our rocks into this object. So here the first step is to change the rotation of our geometry here. So let's add a transform node. So with this transform node, let's move the position something like this. So let's add minus 90 degrees here. And let's change the rotation at something like this. So let's add minus 90 degrees also on the Z-axis. So now let's copy this geometry with the node called copy and transform. So here I will copy something like 6 times. And let's change the translation at something minus 0.3. So now let's add a match size node to put the rocks into the center of our scene. So with the match size, it will put everything at the center. So now we would like to get a different rotation on the Z-axis for each individual rocks here. So to do that, let's add a for each connected pieces. So let's add a transform node into this loop. And let's click on the first node of the loop here and click on create meta import node. And let's rename it something like XXX. It will be easier to find it for the expression into the transform node. So here we want to get a random rotation for each individual pieces based on the Z-axis of the rotate. So to do that, let's click on this parameter and let's type round to get a random value based on the detail attribute. And let's look at into the meta import node, which is 2 dots and this, and we called it XXX. And we want to look for the iteration attributes. And let's type 0 at the end, and it will create a random value for each individual pieces, but we want to multiply this value with a seed. So let's add a null, for example. And let's rename it something like seed. And here you can go into this gear icon and click on edit parameter interface. And from here you can import a float, for example, and you can rename it something like seed. And you can go into the range for minus 360 degrees to 360 degrees and click on apply and accept. So now you can copy this parameter. So right click, Ctrl C and copy parameter. And you can go into the transform node, and here you can multiply this expression by the value. So let's add a multiply and paste relative reference. So now let's change the seed to something like 360 degrees. And now let's see the result at the end of the loop. And now we can see we have a random rotation for every individual pieces based on the y-axis. And now we can change the seed. So basically at 0, it doesn't change the rotation, and at 360 degrees it changes the rotations. So now let's add a sort node into the loop, so for each individual geometry. So with the sort node you can change the point sort to something like by y. And now you can add the group by range node, group by range. And here with the group by range you can change the group type from primitive to points. And here you can select the start points and you can click on invert, the end point. And now it will select the point at the top of our geometry for each individual connected pieces here. So we have a group with 1 point at the top of each rock here. And we will use that group later for the infection effect. So here we'll add our normal node here. Let's add our assemble node because we will make very simple RBD simulation just to add a bit of movement in our rocks. So with the assemble node here, we can create pack primitive for the RBD simulations. And here we can transfer some attribute and group. So maybe we want to transfer the UVs and we want to transfer the group created here with a group by range, and we want to use it later. So let's transfer it. And in my case, I called it group 1. So let's rename it something like start points. And let's go into the assembles and let's transfer the group called start points. So now let's add a null object to specify this is the base for our RBD simulation. So let's rename it something like 2RBD. And now you can add RBD bullet solver. So we will make very basic RBD simulation just into the SOPs to get just a little bit of movement here. So let's add a tube. So you can put that one with the pink flag on this one with the blue flag, and you can change the orientation on the tube to Z-axis. And here you can click on end caps and increase the column number to 32. And you can reduce the radius at something like 0.003 or 4, something like this. Now you can go into the top view, so space 2, and you can add a transform node here. And here you can move your tube something like here. So 1.5. And now you can add a keyframe. Maybe at the frame 40 you can add a keyframe here, and at the frame 48 you can add a keyframe, maybe something like this. So 1.2. So now let's add another transform node. So transform node here. And you can plug the tube into this transform node, and you can select the first one, click on this parameter, right click, copy parameter, and paste it into the second transform node. So paste relative reference, and you can add a minus to invert the position of our tube. And now you can merge these two tubes together. So you can visualize our animation here.
Imagine having access to over 40 hours of exclusive Houdini tutorials, and that library keeps growing every month with brand new content. On Arda Labs, you'll find in-depth Houdini tutorials covering motion design, simulations, product visualization, and more. Plus, you get access to all project files so you can follow along step by step. And right now, we're offering an extra 20% off the annual membership, on top of the 10% discount already included when compared to the monthly plan. This exclusive deal is available for the first 30 people, so don't miss out. Click the link below. Your 20% discount is applied automatically. Secure your spot before it's gone.
And you can go back into the 3D view by pressing space 1. And here you can add another transform node. So we will add a keyframe for the y-axis. So here at the frame maybe 55, I will add a keyframe to the translation on the y-axis at 0. And at the frame 60, I will put this value at -3, for example. So in that case, our tube will go down. So now let's add a normal to our geometry. And let's plug that one into the fourth input, which is the collision geometry input. And here into the RBD bullet solver, you can increase the global substep at something like 3. You can increase the bullet substep to 30. Here into the properties, you can reduce the collision padding at 0, and you can maybe increase the density and the rotational stiffness, bounce, and friction. You can play with these different value to get maybe different results. Here in the collision, we can choose deforming collisions. And we can reduce the collision padding at 0. And here you can disable the gravity for these simulations. And you can go into the advanced tab, and here into bullet solver, you can reduce the sleeping time at 0. So now let's see what we get into our RBD simulations. So for now we have that. So I think it's a bit too much. So let's dive into the RBD bullet solver, and let's start by adding a pop drag. So now let's go back into the SOP level here. Yeah, it's a bit better. Now you can go into the properties and you can play with the rotational stiffness. So in my case, I will put it at 3, and you can play also with bounce and frictions. So let's see the result now. So yeah, I think it's better now. So I will keep this simulation, but of course you can play with different settings to get something a bit different if you want. So now let's add an unpack node. Unpack to unpack our geometry. Now let's add a file cache node, and you can rename it something like RBD sim tutorials. So here, if you want to use Fox Render Farm, you have to put it into explicit, and you can put it into $heap, and you can replace the geo with a cache folder. So I like to put all my cache into a specific cache folder, and you can add a $OS folder, which is the name of our node. And here you can simply click on save to disk to save this simulation into cache. So it's very, very light and easy. So you can see it takes only 2 or 3 seconds. And now you can add an attribute delete and keep only the attribute you want to use. So maybe we can keep the UVs, normals, and not sure if you need to keep that one. And you can click on delete non-selected to keep only the selected attributes. And now you can add a null here. And you can rename it something like render rocks RBD, for examples. So now this is the base of our simulation. So now we can create our fake liquid growth effect. And to do that, we can take the end of our unpack here, and you can add a time shift node. Sorry, time shifts. So let's freeze our animation at the first frame. So delete that one, delete channel, and you can put 1 for the first frame. And here you can add a peak node. So for the peak value, I will go at something like 0.02, so something very, very low, just to add a bit of extrusion effect on our geometry. So let's start by cleaning some attribute with the attribute delete. And with the attribute delete here, maybe we can select only the normals and the UVs, and we can click on delete non-selected to keep only the UVs and the normals. So in that case, it will delete our first class attribute, which is here. And now we can add another loop, so for each connected pieces. And for this loop, we will add mops spread fall off. So if you don't have the mops, I highly recommend you to download them for free. It's a very, very useful tool, and you can use it for free into Houdini. So if you don't have them already installed, you can check out mops for Houdini on Google and download the tools. So here, like before, I will select the first node of the loop here and click on create meta import node. And now I will rename it YYY 3 times. And like before, for the mob spread fall off, I will create a noise, and I will add a random noise parameter based on each connected pieces with the meta import node here. But now let's start by adding our start point group. So let's click on that one, and let's select the group created here. So we have created a group called start points, and we will use that group to create the start of our infection with the mob spread fall off. And here you can preview the fall off by clicking here. And here you can create an animation for your spread, and maybe we can start the animation at the frame 60. And we can go into the animate tab here, and we add a keyframe at the frame 60 at 0 for the spread. And we can go at the frame 160, for example, and you can put the spread at the end of our rocks. So maybe something like this, 1.3. And add another keyframe with Alt and left click. And now we can see the result for our rock setup. So now we can see we have a very, very similar infection effects. So we can add a noise. So let's apply a noise here. And we can play with the amplitude and with the frequency. So maybe increase a bit the amplitude to 1.5. And you can play with the frequency. So maybe at 3, and you can play also with the roughness. And in our case, we will use a random pattern into the offset here. So like before, let's add this expression, so round detail. And let's look at our meta import node, which is called Y. And we want to use our iteration attributes. Iteration. So now we have our expression for the first axis. So let's copy it, Control C, and let's paste it into this one and this one. So now we have a random pattern for each individual rocks here. So we can get something a bit more organic. So now let's add an assemble node. And with this assemble node, let's create the name attribute and let's create pack primitive here and let's transfer some attributes. So we want to use mops and maybe the class maybe and the name and maybe UVs. And also for the transfer group, you can add the group created before. I'm not sure if I will use it later, but you can transfer it. And here you can use the transform pieces. And here you can select your simulation point from the last input of the RBD bullet solver, and you can plug that one into the second input of the transform pieces. And here you can plug this geometry into the first input of our transform pieces here. And now we can see we have our mops simulation into our moving rocks, like this. So now we can unpack our geometry. You can unpack. Now you can promote our mops falloff attribute from point to primitive. So let's add the attribute promote node. So with the attribute promote, we will change from point to primitive and we will select the mops falloff attribute. And here we can use the blast node. And with the blast, we can type something like @mops falloff minus something like 0.2. So now we have our growth effect here. Now to create a volume from our geometry, we can't do that with a simple plane because our geometry don't have any extrusion for now. So let's add the poly extrude node. And here you can extrude at something like minus 0.02 for example, and you can change from primitive to points normal here, and you can click on output backs. So now we can reverse our normal. So let's add the reverse and let's add the normal node. And now we can convert this geometry into VDB. So let's add the VDB from polygons. And here with the VDB from polygons, you can reduce the voxel size at something like 0.01. And then you can use the VDB reshape SDF. And you can keep the delay at 1 for now, but we will see if I need to adjust this parameter later. Let's add the VDB smooth SDF. And for the smooth, I will smooth it with the Gaussian operation, and I will put the iteration at 6, for example, or maybe 4. And let's add the convert VDB. And let's convert from VDB to polygons. And here I need to increase the VDB from polygons, so I will decrease this value to 0.03, for example, to get more resolutions. Maybe it's too much now, so let's make 0.004. So yeah, I think it's better. Now you can increase a bit the VDB smooth to something like 8. And now we can see we have something very, very smooth and nice. Now you can make a file cache here, but if you want to use your UVs, you can also use the attribute transform node. And you can transfer your UVs from here to the VDB here. So let's put that one into the first input. Let's put that one into the second input. And here you can transfer your UVs attribute, which is a vertices attribute. And here you can simply add normal node here. And you can add a file cache to put in cache your simulation, and you can rename it something like VDB growth tutorials. And you can put that one into explicit, and you can rename it something like cache and $OS for the name of the node. And here you can simply click on save to disk. So now the caching process is done, and you can see you have our growth animation with the UVs from here on our moving pieces. And now you can add our sorry, we already have the normal, but you can use the smooth to smooth a bit our points here. So maybe we can increase to something like 20. And you can use the smooth to smooth the normal to avoid getting some flickering issues. So you can replace the attribute from P to N, and here you can put the strength at something like 75. And here you can add a null to specify this is the end of our growth animation. So let's rename it something like render growth. And now you can simply select this null, Control C, you can go back into the object level. In my case, I have the OD tool plugin, so I can just make Control, Shift, and V, and it will automatically create a new geometry node with an object merge inside with the target null I have copied here. So I will do the same for the rock. So let's Control C, Control, Shift, and V. And here I will disable that one. And now we have our two geometries. So we have our growth and we have our rocks. That's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and check artivoxr.com to get premium 3D resources. You can access to this project file with our Artifiles membership. See you in the next one. Bye.